1 o'clock, and then take the rest of the day off.
All right, we're at 9:01, so we better get started. I will pray to open us. Lord, I thank you for just the year that we've been able to have together, looking into theology and into your word. And Lord, I pray that as we wrap up this week, that you just be blessing our time together as we look into the Davidic covenant. In Jesus' name, amen. So last week we talked about the law, and this week we're moving on to let's actually do one more thing in the law, since it just came to my mind. Because we're talking about covenants, it's probably important to talk about. Let's go to Numbers 25. So within the covenant at Sinai, there is you could say a sub-covenant, a covenant that is made to a particular person that impacts the Torah moving forward through the rest of Israel's practice of the priesthood within the law. So Numbers 25. Preceding Numbers 25, you have this event with this guy named Balaam. And Balaam's the guy that's got the donkey that talks to him. Balaam is a prophet that the king Balak summoned to curse Israel so that he could beat them in war. And no matter how hard Balaam tries, he can't curse Israel. He can only bless them, which is the Abrahamic covenant. And in fact, the wording of the Abrahamic covenant is used in Balaam's interaction with Balak. What we don't read in Numbers right away, but we do find out later in the Torah, is that although Balaam was not permitted by the Lord to curse Israel, Balaam did tell Balak how to overcome Israel, and it was through sending in women. And Balaam's actions results in Numbers 25. So Number 25, verse 1, it says, "While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab." Right? Balak is the king of Moab. He sends in the women there, and they turn the people away from the Lord. Verse 2, "These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to Baal of Peor. The anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, 'Take all the chiefs of the people and hang them up in the sun before the Lord, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel.' And Moses said to the judges of Israel, 'Each of you kill those of his men who have yoked themselves to Baal of Peor.' And behold, one of the people of Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his family in the sight of Moses and in the sight of the whole congregation of the people of Israel, while they were weeping in the entrance of the tent of meeting." So what's going on here is the Lord calls the nation to repent. Moses brings about this process for them to start repenting. And this guy's like, no, we're not going to do this. So to take a stand against Moses and against the Lord, he brings in this Midianite woman to show that we're just going to live however we want. Verse 7, "When Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose and left the congregation and took a spear in his hand and went after the man of Israel into the chamber and pierced both of them, the man of Israel and the woman through her belly. Thus the plague on the people of Israel was stopped. Nevertheless, those who died by the plague were 24,000. Wow. The Lord said to Moses, 'Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, has turned back my wrath from the people of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not consume the people of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace. And it shall be to him and to his descendants after him the covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the people of Israel. And so, because of Phinehas's actions, God makes a covenant with Phinehas, and he gives him and his descendants forever, perpetually, a priesthood within the Aaronic priesthood. So you have Aaron, you have Eleazar, and then you have his son Phinehas. And so the priesthood is going to continue through the line of Phinehas, primarily, not just Phinehas, but primarily there's going to be a priesthood through Phinehas because of his actions there. And so this does make a difference when we come into the days of Solomon. Somewhat it starts within the days of David, but when they get established in the land, you no longer need the priests to carry the ark where it's supposed to go, and the they no longer need to carry the tabernacle where it needs to go and the articles of the tabernacle with it. So that was a role of specific priests to do. Once you get into the time of David and the tabernacle is established in Jerusalem and then later the temple, David makes the change and he turns some of the priesthood lines. They no longer carry the vessels, but they now become musicians within the temple. But for the line of Phinehas's line will see no change. His line will forever be a part of the sacrificial system in the temple, as long as the temple remains. So that's just it's a covenant in the Bible that's not frequently referenced because it is a part of the Sinai covenant. It's an extension of it. And so it's not often referenced, but it is a covenant that exists. So on to the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant begins in Deuteronomy 17. So let's go there. So how many here have heard somebody in church say Israel was never meant to have a king? Anybody? I've heard it several times. That's wrong. Israel was actually designed to have a king within the Torah. In Deuteronomy 17, there's a provision given for when they are to set a king. Deuteronomy 17, beginning in verse 14, it says, "When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like all the nations that are around me, you may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother." So it's the way that this is worded is not simply just God giving permission for them to do it. You may indeed set a king over you is quite emphatic. It's giving the sense that this is something that God is going to set up at some point within Israel. And when we go back to the garden and Adam's role in the garden, it makes sense that there would be a king over Israel. Because if Adam's role as the head of creation was to be a priest and a king over the world, or to act in those roles, then at some point it makes sense that Israel, being a kingdom of priests, would then have a head who acts as a king. Prior to this, it's judges. So you have Moses, who would be the first judge, and then following that, you have this series you have Joshua, and then the series of judges within judges, until you get to Samuel, and Samuel is the final judge. And the people come to Samuel and they say, well, we want a king. And Samuel tells them this is a horrible idea. Why is it a horrible idea? Well, because the king is going to bring heavy taxation, and he's going to bring them into wars that they don't want, and he's going to enlist their sons, and their sons are going to die in war. And they say, yeah, that's all right, give us a king anyways. Now, the language that's used in 1 Samuel when the people ask for a king it's specific, and it's alluding back to Deuteronomy 17 in the sense that they are not asking for a king within the confines of Deuteronomy 17. So 1 Samuel chapter 8. If you read through the Old Testament, you're going to see you see this wonderful in quotations, this wonderful theme of these great men having horrible sons. 1 Samuel chapter 8 says, when Samuel became old, he made his sons judges over Israel. The name of his first son was Joel, and the name of his second, Abijah. And these were judges in Beersheba. Yet his sons did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. So Eli, back in 1 Samuel 3, or starting in chapter 2, but when Samuel is called to be a prophet and a judge, the first prophecy that he's to give is to Eli, basically saying, Eli, your family line is cut off and your sons are going to die. And it's because his sons were wicked, because they perverted justice. They did not walk in the ways of the Lord, but sought after gain and took bribes. And now Samuel's sons are described the exact same way. So, verse 4, then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah, and said to him, behold, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us like all the nations. But this thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them, according to all the deeds that they have done from the day I brought them up out of Egypt, even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you. Now then, obey their voice. Only you shall solemnly warn them and show them the ways of the king who shall reign over them. So they're concerned because Samuel's kids are bad and are greedy and that. And so Samuel's warning is basically the king is going to be worse. And he's going to have power that a judge would not have. Notice, though, the Lord defines why it's problematic that they're asking for a king. It's because they're rejecting the Lord. So when the people here say, they give us a king to judge us like all the nations, it's because they want to be like the nations. They're not called to be like the nations, they're called to be set apart, to be holy. They're supposed to be different and distinct from the nations, but they demand a king. And their demanding a king was so that they could be like the nations, not so that they could serve the Lord. Whereas in Deuteronomy 17, it says when they ask to set up a king like the nations, it should be one who serves the Lord, who has a heart after the Lord, who will lead the people in the ways of the Lord. It's not what Israel is asking for here. They are, in essence, asking for somebody who is going to permit them to live in sin and to go after idols. And so God gives them the king that they want. He gives them Saul. Saul's not a good king. He starts off okay, but he quickly just gives in to the people, and then he becomes a quite corrupt king. While Saul is king, you have then another person appointed as king. That is, he'll become king after the death of Saul, and that is David. And when Samuel goes to appoint David, he thinks that it should be David's brothers. Why does he think it should be David's brothers?
Size.
They're bigger, they're stronger, and David is a small, ruddy guy. Right? He's not the biggest. He doesn't look the best, and he's a ginger. So it throws that point in there. I think more just to get reference to his size, but he's not the ideal candidate for being a king. Now, David, when he's appointed, I think we often think that David was, late teens or something like that. David was a man at this point. When David killed Goliath, he was a man. He's described as a man of war prior to killing Goliath. Right? So David has some experience in battle, and in Israel you did not go into battle until you were older than the age of 20. Right? So when you have the census is given in Numbers, I don't know why they call the book Numbers, because there's a bunch of numbers in it. Those numbers are formulated based off of those who can go to war. And so the 600,000 that you have is the size of the army of Israel, because that's the only thing that really matters. If you have a lot of people but a very small army, then you have no strength. So the numbers that are given in Numbers, it's a census for an army, and the same when David takes his census in his life at the end of 2 Samuel. It's to figure out how many fighting men do I have. David is not the ideal choice, but then you have that famous passage that the Lord does not look on the outward appearances, but he looks on the heart. And Samuel's problem is that he's looking for somebody kind of like Saul. Again, because Saul is, a head taller than everybody else, and David is maybe a head shorter than everybody else. It doesn't give us the specifics on his height, but you don't get the sense that he's this valiant man, and yet he turns out to be Israel's greatest king in many ways. David finally ascends to the throne. We're going to jump forward a bit. And he has defeated nearly all of his enemies. The Lord has called him to. He's brought peace upon Israel. He has brought the ark to Jerusalem, and the tabernacle is there. And David sees a problem, because David is established in Israel, but he doesn't feel the Lord is established in Israel to the degree that the Lord should be. So we go to 2 Samuel chapter 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. Now when the king lived in his house, and the Lord had given him rest from all his surrounding enemies, the king said to Nathan the prophet, "See now, I dwell in a house of cedar, but the ark of God dwells in a tent." Right? David's like, why should I live in a house that is greater than the house that the Lord dwells in? Nathan said to the king, "Go, do all that is in your heart, for the Lord is with you." But that same night the word of the Lord came to Nathan. "Go and tell my servant David, thus says the Lord, would you build me a house to dwell in? I have not lived in a house since the day I brought up the people of Israel from Egypt to this day, but I have been moving about in a tent for my dwelling. In all places where I have moved with all the people of Israel, did I speak a word with any of the judges of Israel, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, saying, why have you not built me a house of cedar? Now therefore, thus you shall say to my servant David, thus says the Lord of hosts, I took you from the pasture, from following the sheep, that you should be prince over my people. And I have been with you wherever you went, and have cut off all your enemies from before you. I will make for you a great name, like the great ones of the earth. And where have we heard this, I will make for you a great name, before? Abraham, right? Part of the Abrahamic covenant is that he will have a great name. And in the ancient world, you have a great name by having many offspring who remember who you were. So a great name within the ancient world, and especially later within Judaism, especially within the theology of the Sadducees, did not believe there was any resurrection. The only way that you could live forever is if people remembered you forever. And so you wanted a great name, because Abraham is remembered forever among the Jews, and David is remembered forever among the Jews because God gave them a great name. In the ancient world, the only sure way to live forever, that they thought, was that if people remembered who you were. So God's going to give David a great name. Verse 10, and I will appoint a place for my people Israel and plant them, so that they may dwell in their own place and be disturbed no more. That also is a reference back to the Abrahamic covenant. God says, Abraham, I'm going to give you a land to be your possession forever. And God is telling David, in this place, I'm going to establish my people there forever and be disturbed no more. How so? Rest of verse 10, and violent men shall afflict them no more as formerly. From the time I appointed judges over my people Israel. So Israel at some point is not going to have war anymore. They're not going to be disturbed anymore. There's an implication from this that it also includes they will not be any famine or any pestilence anymore, because the language that's used here, verse 11, continuing, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. All this language that's used here is referencing back to the blessings in Deuteronomy 28. So if Israel is obedient to the Lord as a covenant community, then they will have the blessings of the law. And part of the blessings of the law is that they will never be overcome. And the indication from these blessings is that if they are perpetually obedient, they will never go to war again. Not only that, they will never have famine again. Not only that, they will have so much abundance in their crops that the nations will come to them for food. So just like all the nations went to Egypt to receive food, all the nations will go to Israel to receive food and blessing. Now, we go back to the famine that plagued the world and Egypt. Why did all the nations go to Egypt for food? And why did they have the food? Because of Joseph, who is a Jew, who is a Hebrew. And so the only reason that they go to Egypt is not actually for them to go to Egypt for food, it's to go to Joseph for food, which means they go to Israel for food. Because Joseph, within the Torah, pictures what it means to be faithful to God and to the Torah, what it means to be a blessing to the whole world. Right? Abraham was that in part, but Joseph becomes the epitome of that because the whole world comes to him to buy food. That's why he recognizes his brothers when they come to buy food, because he's there. He's active in this. There's only one above him, that being Pharaoh himself. Becomes a great messianic picture. The implication from this covenant is that Israel is going to be in their land in perfect peace forever. How is this going to take place? The remainder of verse 11, it says, moreover, the Lord declares to you that the Lord will make you a house, that is, a dynasty. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you. Note, offspring there is a collective singular word, but also a singular word. So offspring is ambiguous throughout Scripture, and it's intentionally so, because offspring will refer to one person and it will refer to many people. So my great-great-great-great-grandfather's offspring are all my relatives, right? But it is also his firstborn son. It's in essence giving that same description. The offspring of Abraham is Isaac, singular. He is the child of promise, but it is also Jacob and the 12 sons of Jacob and the entirety of the 12 tribes. And as we'll get to, all of Israel. As we'll talk about in the sermon this morning, all of Israel and what all of Israel actually means. When he says, I will raise up your offspring after you, there is a collective sense in this because his name will be great, but more precisely here than in the Abrahamic covenant, it is a singular offspring. This offspring, who shall come from your body? Where's that language from again? The Abrahamic covenant. Right? Eliezer of Damascus, Genesis 15, will not be your heir, but it shall be one who descends from your very loins. It's the same phrase that is used here. If you have an ESV, you probably have a footnote that says, on body that says loins. It should come from your loins. It'll be your own child. and I will establish his kingdom. So then, within the literary structure here, the word kingdom and the word house are used synonymously. The Lord is going to build a house for David. He's going to build a kingdom for David. He's going to build this dynasty. And this offspring, not David, but this offspring shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. And so it's the offspring of David that is going to build the house for God. Then we have some unique phrases given about this offspring. Verse 14, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. It's for this reason why you have Psalm 2 and Psalm 110. These psalms that are very messianic, but very kingdom-focused, where the king is referred to as the Son of God. And in that sense, it is not the Son of God as in deity. So most often within Israel's history, the Son of God was not a reference to deity, but reference is more of a symbolic, a metaphorical reference that God was the Father and this was the Son. David is the Son of God, but he's not God. Right? So there's a distinction between David. Solomon is a son of God, but he's not Jesus. He's not the Son of God. He's not deity. The Bible will use it both ways. When you get to the New Testament, though, the phrase does mean deity, because it's used in a specific way that has this implication that you are a son of God. This is deity. It's a little harder to see, I guess, in English than when you go to the Old Testament with Hebrew and that, but it's meant to be this relationship. How is it a relationship between a son and a father? When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. That is, when he sins, when the king sins, the curses of Deuteronomy 28 will come upon Israel. Which puts a lot of pressure on the king. Because when the king rebels, all the people rebel, which we see in 1st and 2nd Kings. It's why the northern tribes were virtually wiped out by Assyria. They had no good king. The south, Judah, had some good kings and some great kings. And God would bring his discipline upon with the rods of men. That means other people are going to come in and invade Israel, which we've seen several times within the Old Testament, and even in the New Testament with Rome. But the Lord says, my steadfast love will not depart from him as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. Meaning this dynasty, this kingdom, is not going to be taken away from David and given to another. It will always be in David's line. This is the reason why when you get to 164 BC, with the Maccabean revolt, that the Hasmonean dynasty becomes a problem. Because we call it now the Hasmonean dynasty, but the Hasmoneans are Levites. They're not from the tribe of Judah, right? So Mattathias, who kickstarted the rebellion, was a Levitical priest who refused to sacrifice a pig to Zeus at the temple. And so he killed the people that were trying to force him to do it. His sons rose up, most prominently Judas, Maccabeus just meaning the hammer, because he came down like a hammer on the Seleucids, on Antiochus IV, and they eventually, for the span of 14 years, drove them out of Israel. And at that point, it was the only point that Israel had independence since 587 BC, but I would take that back all the way to 605 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar first came upon Judah. So for 500 years, close to, they had no independence until that point. Now, God was definitely at work at that point, but there was no line of Judah that went onto the throne. That's why in the days of Jesus, that's why King Herod is such a problem. Because Herod is from the Edomites, but he marries into the line from the Levites, and that's how he gets into this royal succession, because you have this these people who are ruling, and eventually you get this guy who marries into the line, and then he has offspring, and that's where you get the lines of Herod. In the New Testament, the Herodians, the people who believe that Herod should be on the throne, but you also have this other group that thinks that Herod should have no power because he's not of the line of David. Technically, he's not even a Jew. He'd be half Jewish. And then his descendants after him, once you get into actually Jesus' ministry, it's a different Herod than going back to Herod the Great. Right? So there's problems there. We could also go back to the returns of the exiles. So in Ezra, Nehemiah, in Haggai, and in Zechariah, there's an individual by the name of Zerubbabel who is mentioned. Zerubbabel is the heir to the throne, but he cannot be king because they are under Persian dominion. So what you have here is God says, I'm going to establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I'm not going to remove my steadfast love from him like I did from Saul. Meaning, the throne was taken from Saul and given to another. But then you have 587, 586 BC with the siege on Jerusalem, and no one from the line of David has ever sat on the throne since that invasion, since exile. So Zedekiah was the last king of Israel to sit on the throne. You have Zerubbabel, who should be king, but he can't be king because they're not allowed to appoint a king when they're under foreign occupation. You get into the time of the Hasmonean dynasty, and it's not a line of David that's on the throne. You don't actually get a king until you get to really Herod. And I mean, you could go before that, and what do they call them king, or they just call them judges or rulers or leaders? We can go back with, is Jonathan really a king or not, etc. There's no line of David on the throne. And when you get to the time of Jesus, then you have Jesus, who is the heir to the throne. And Matthew's genealogy, so there's two primary explanations for the two different genealogies in Matthew and Luke. One of the common ones says one line is Mary's, one line is Matthew's. Valid. I lean towards the other one, which is primarily put forth by Eusebius, and that is Matthew records the kingly line, which he clearly does, and Luke records the genetic line, but both are the lines of Joseph. And it's Matthew's point, which this is Matthew's point in the genealogy, is to show that Joseph is the heir to the throne, if there was a king in Israel. Whether or not Joseph knows that. Because Jesus is meant to be the heir to the throne. But from the invasion that leads to the exile to the time of Christ, there is nobody on the throne. And so it becomes this question that when we read here, my steadfast love will not depart from him as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you, and your house and your kingdom, that is David's, so not just the offspring's kingdom, but David's kingdom, shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. The question then becomes, well, has God failed his promises? Because Jesus is not on the throne in Jerusalem right now. And so it raises the problem, because when you have this exile take place, and Zerubbabel does not go on the throne, and Joseph is not on the throne, and even the descendants of Joseph back to the Hasmonean days, none of them were on the throne, when they could have reinstated the Davidic kingdom. It raises the problem, why is there nobody on the throne? And has God removed his steadfast love from David and from the offspring of David? So there's a question that's raised, and it becomes a very important question. And the question is answered within the New Covenant, which we don't have much time to get to today, but we'll touch on it briefly. So Jeremiah 32. Now, there's a very important point. Jeremiah 31. We don't want 32 yet. There's very important points about the New Covenant. The New Covenant is for Israel. and then from Israel to the Gentiles. So we're going to get to this in Romans, but it's the reason why Paul says to the Jew first and also to the Greek. Because the new covenant was for Israel first and then to the Greek. That Israel was supposed to be the means by which the new covenant came to the whole world. So Jeremiah 31, beginning in verse 31. And I say beginning in verse 31, but I don't actually mean beginning in verse 31. This whole thing begins in chapter 30, where it speaks about the restoration for Israel and Judah. And it picks up on the promises. I'll just read verse 3. For behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah. Notice both are said there, Israel and Judah, which is very important because Israel has not been a nation 722 BC to 586 past. Well, you can do the math. What, 150 years or so? Like we're past destruction at this point, or getting very close to destruction. I don't remember where exactly this falls in the timeline, if we even know. Jeremiah is all out of chronological order, which makes it fun for us Westerners who love chronological order in our Bibles. He's going to restore the fortunes of Israel and Judah, meaning both the southern and the northern tribes. And I will bring them back to the land that I gave their fathers, and they shall take possession of it. But this is not going to come until after, verse 7, alas, that day is so great, this day of great trouble. There is none like it. It is a time of distress for Jacob, yet he shall be saved out of it. Paul's going to pick up on this in Romans 11. After this great day, you have verse 8, and it shall come to pass in that day, declares the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from your neck, is the yoke of the nations, and I will burst your bonds, and foreigners shall no more make a servant of him. The him there is just a singular for all of Israel, but there's more to it than that, because it's, again, this singular offspring, plural offspring, within a singular. Verse 9, but they shall serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I shall raise up for them. So we're at this point here where there is no more Davidic king on the throne, but God says there will be. How is there going to be? This whole prophetic journey in Jeremiah 30 and 31, all one prophecy, comes to this conclusion. Jeremiah 31:31. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Again, both are mentioned because it's not just for the two tribes in the south. It's not just for those two tribes. It is for the north that has not existed for a long time. They've been scattered. They've been integrated into Assyria. Do they even exist anymore is a question that could have been asked even in those days. But he's going to make a covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. Right? So before they had the book that they went to, and God says, no, it's going to be on their hearts. And this is more than just a conscience. And this is more than just even having knowledge of the word. The implication within this new covenant, especially within the context of Zechariah, who picks up on the language here, is that they are going to know every word of God's word. Right? It's going to be second nature to them. Because as Jews, they did know every word. They memorized their entire Old Testament. They memorized the Torah. They memorized the prophets. By the time you get to Jesus' time, a good, trained Jewish boy and Jewish girl even would know the law by heart. And if not just the law, then also the prophets. And if not just the prophets, then also the writings. Basically, your entire Old Testament, they would know it by heart. You didn't have chapter and verse references, and so they could say, recite a few lines, and it's like, oh yeah, I know the whole context for that, because I know it all. But they didn't practice it. So the knowledge is not just them knowing it well, but then they live it out, because it's on their hearts. It's not just set aside. This is Ezekiel's language, which Ezekiel gives later on than Jeremiah does here, where I'll remove your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Why? So that you can know me well, and you can know my law, and you can do it. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts. And then you have the same phrase that's given to David, which is also given to Israel earlier. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Right? I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me. From the least of them to the greatest declares the Lord. Now again, this is also picked up in Zechariah, where Zechariah says the nations are going to flock to Israel to ask, show us the ways of the Lord, because they will all know the Lord. And the only way that the nations will be able to know who the Lord is through Israel. So it's the language of Zechariah picking up on this new covenant. For, the Lord says, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. So how is God going to establish this new covenant? He's going to forgive them and remember their sin no more, which has the implication that he's going to do something greater than the sacrificial system, because the sacrificial system cannot deal with sin forever. It can deal with unintentional sins, but what happens when you bring your offering and then the next day you sin again unintentionally? You need another offering. And Hebrews picks this up to say, yeah, sure, there's forgiveness within the law for unintentional sins, not sins of rebellion. For unintentional sins, yeah, sure, there is forgiveness, but the fact that you keep sinning means that there is an unending flow of blood coming from the altar. And there would have to be one forever. And therefore, we see that it is evident, the author of Hebrews says, that the law could forgive no one. Because the law can't put an end to sin. It can only show that sin abounds. Now, the law is good, the law is perfect, the law is holy. Paul is going to get into this in Romans, both in where we are now in Romans and in chapter 7. But the point of the law is good and is holy, and it shows God's morality, but all it'll end up doing is showing us our sinfulness, because there would need to be that constant flow of blood. For God to say, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sins no more, gives the implication that some sort of greater work is going to take place, where all the evil and all their sin is purged out. And then God swears this with an oath. This oath is verses 35 through 37, but we're going to read those in the sermon, so we won't touch those on us now. How is God going to establish this Davidic covenant? He's going to do it through the new covenant, because God understands everything, right? He knows everything. God understands that the kingdom promised to David cannot come to fruition, it cannot succeed, unless there is a heart change for his people. And until there's a heart change for the people of God, you cannot enter the kingdom. And the Jews knew this long before Jesus came. So I departed from here 5 minutes before it started, because I remembered I was going to look something up and then read it to you. So I went to go find the book, but the book is like 900 pages. It's the writings from the Dead Sea Scrolls. So in the Qumran community, they have extensive writing about community law and how we live as a community and how we be the covenant people. And one thing that they repeatedly say is nobody who is sinful in essence will enter into the kingdom of the Messiah, to the teacher of righteousness. So when Messiah comes, the Qumran community believed, when Messiah comes, he will bring about this Davidic kingdom, and we will enter into this era of perfect peace from the nations. God will be among us. We will serve him. We will never have any war. Sin will be abolished. We will never sin again. We will be perfect. And we will reign forever with him as a kingdom of priests. All this sort of language is used, which is in the Old Testament. They pick up on this. They believe that their community was the only one that was going to get it, because they believed they were the only true Jews that there were. But the language that they use picked up on this fact that they recognize there needs to be a change. And unless that change comes, unless we follow the Lord, then we can't enter the kingdom. So we need to be following the Lord, following his law, and when he comes, those who do will be let into the kingdom, and those who don't won't. Now, they didn't have the whole we need God's righteousness part, as is taught in Christianity, but there's a lot of parallels between the eschatology at the Qumran community and a futuristic eschatology that was taught by the church fathers, some of the church fathers, and a pre-mill eschatology as it's known today. There are a number of parallels between it, that one day the Messiah is going to come and he's going to usher in the kingdom. And they base it off of passages like this and other ones in the prophets and the Davidic covenant. Because, as we read in Isaiah 11, we'll close with this. Why is there going to be a reign forever by the offspring? Right? So, how is it a collective offspring? Because there will always be another offspring in the line of David. Or, the other is that one offspring will live forever. Both were perspectives within Jewish theology before Jesus came. One was that we will live forever, and the other was that Israel will live forever by having endless lines, endless generations of faithful Jews and faithful kings. Isaiah 11 here, though, this is why, or the end result of this covenant with David. There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse. Jesse is David's father, right? So from the line of David, a branch from his roots shall bear fruit, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge, and the fear of the Lord. Now, this passage is often referenced for Revelation, when it talks about the seven spirits of God, where it's these seven. And I think that's probably the correct interpretation, because Revelation is all about the kingship of Christ. Verse 3, and his, that is the stump, it is the Messiah, it is the line of David, this offspring of the Davidic covenant, his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He is Psalm 2. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide disputes by what his ears hear. Meaning he's not going to judge things on a whim, but he's going to have intelligence. He's going to judge, verse 4, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteous shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. Meaning he's going to wage war against all the wicked and purge them out. Now it's out of Israel at the very least, but as we read throughout the context of Isaiah and into the New Covenant, it's the whole world. He brings judgment upon all the nations. And the end result of this is, verse 6, the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, and the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together. And the little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, and the young shall lie down together. The lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall not put his hand on the adder's den. What is this? It's the Garden of Eden, where this would have taken place, because there was no death, there was no conflict, there was no sin. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So even before Jeremiah gives this prophecy about the new covenant, Isaiah says this is going to come through the Messiah, because the Messiah is going to bring about this new covenant. And it's not just for Israel, but verse 10, in that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. We'll skip over right to the end, verse 16 of this chapter. And there shall be a highway from Assyria for the remnant that remains of his people, as there was for Israel when they came up from the land of Egypt. Elsewhere in Isaiah it speaks about there's going to be a highway from Assyria to Egypt. meaning that the nations can flow to Israel to come to the Messiah, to the Jewish people to inquire from him and about the Lord, and from all the Jews about the Lord, for they shall all know him, but also to show this safety and the security that there's a highway from two nations that have greatly oppressed Israel. There's a highway there, it means there's no conflict, there's no war. And so the Davidic covenant is meant to bring about this perfect peace across the world. And that is done through Christ. But the new covenant has to be set in place first because you have to have this heart change. One thing that's abundantly clear, or not abundantly clear, but is becomes abundantly clear when you think about it. We'll put it that way. All of the covenants, except maybe the covenants at Sinai, but all the covenants, the covenant with Abraham, the covenant with David, and the new covenants are ultimately are the Father's covenants with his Son. They're God's covenants with Jesus. And they extend to us through Christ. But because it's to the singular offspring, the covenant is between God the Father and God the Son. Which means that what he has promised in these covenants will come about because God will fulfill his promises to his Son. And the service starts in 5 minutes, so we should get out of here.